Hi, Scott Orlin with CINEMA-Magazin. Back in the year 2003, I got to go to the great state of Alabama to go on the set of a movie called Big Fish that was filming there. It was directed by Tim Burton and it starred Ewan McGregor and Albert Finney. Well, 10 years later, I'm in New York, not for the movie. Now it's being transitioned into a big Broadway musical. And the one constant are the two producers, Jinks, Bruce Cohen, Academy Award-winning producers, who are now both of this process. A little bit. I want to ask you, when do you decide what movie makes a good transition to become a Broadway musical? Because there are hundreds of movies out, thousands of movies.
You know, we had our very first conversation about turning Big Fish into a Broadway musical right before the movie came out. So that was almost 10 years ago that Bruce and I spoke to John August, who wrote the screenplay, about it. And we started talking about how there are these wonderful fantasy sequences in the movie and how those would make great musical numbers. And I always feel like if you're going to turn a movie into a musical, you have to have a reason. So that was sort of reason one. And then we also loved the idea of, as you just said in the movie, Albert Finney and Ewan McGregor played the same character at different ages. Well, on stage, one actor, in this case Norbert Leo Butz, plays the whole thing, and I think it allows the audience to get much more emotionally involved in the character, because you're not having to say, oh wait, this is the older version of that, it's just all one guy. And we thought that would be a great way to sort of bring the audience into the emotional experience.
And one thing too, I mean, Bruce, you may talk about this, is that when you're filming a movie, you have anywhere from 3 to 4 months, you have a huge landscape, all these special effects that have to come in. When you're making a musical, when you're doing a stage production, you're limited to the canvas of what's physically on stage. What were the challenges there of creating all these fantasies?
Well, the idea was we had to reconceive the whole thing, and that's why, to the last question, some movies make good Broadway musicals and some don't, is you have to figure out a way to forget about the film and to make a new piece of art from scratch that's going to work as a stage production. And in the case of Big Fish, one of the exciting challenges was we were trying to do a musical that works both as a very true, very real, very intimate drama about this family, a husband, a wife, and his son, and the issues that they have between themselves, and also a big, broad musical comedy that has these amazing fantasy numbers with witches and mermaids and giants, and that works on that level too. So that was the whole ball of wax, was the challenge to be able to give the audience both in one evening of theater.
You keep talking about challenges. I mean, making a movie obviously is a big challenge, but when you do a Broadway show, is there an advantage because you've already kind of worked through the process of a movie, what works script-wise, character-wise, and when you come into this process, I know you go through out-of-town tryouts, you guys were in Chicago, about tweaking the story emotionally to get what's right?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Most Broadway musicals are based on something. People have talked about, oh, all these musicals are being based on movies, but in the history of Broadway musicals, they used to be based more on plays or on books, and now movies, because there's a source material to go to, so there's a spine there. You can kind of take a look back and see what works. The key here was making sure that the musical numbers weren't just being slotted in because we could, but actually adding to and enhancing and improving on what we did in the motion picture years ago. And we have a great composer-lyricist in Andrew Lippa, who I think took some of the great ideas in that movie and just made them sing in the way that only a theater piece really can.
Well, and I'll also add that in our case, John August wrote the screenplay to the film, and then he also wrote the book to the musical, and that ended up being a perfect situation because he gave himself great freedom to do two things. Number one, he gave himself the freedom, of course, to use bits from his script from the film if he chose to, although there aren't a lot in the Broadway musical, but more importantly, he gave himself freedom to start completely fresh. And because it was his work originally, he didn't feel any pressure to use any of it. He gave himself complete freedom to reinvent whenever he wanted to, and that's why the hope is that for people who loved the movie, that everything they loved about the movie, they'll feel like it has that same emotional arc and a relatively similar experience, but actually it's a whole new piece of work.
And just the last question for you. It's a book that was made into a movie that's now being made into a musical, which one day could be made back into a movie.
That's actually true. We actually have a deal in place should that happen, and we would love for it to be a movie musical. But right now, you're getting us on the eve of the show opening on Broadway, and literally that's all we can think about. It has been a 10-year journey with Andrew Lippa and John August, and the one person I have to mention that we haven't so far is we got the genius of the American musical theater, a woman named Susan Stroman, to direct and choreograph. And she, of course, did The Producers and Contact and Young Frankenstein and Scottsboro Boys. And she's been so magnificent that it's like getting Spielberg to direct your movie is getting Susan Stroman to direct and choreograph your musical.
Or Tim Burton.
Or Tim Burton, exactly.
That's right. Well, for those of you in Germany, if you're going to happen to be in New York, hopefully in the next couple of years, you're going to get a chance to go see Big Fish. Dan?
Scott.
Bruce?
Scott, good to see you.
Hopefully we'll be seeing you maybe in May at another award show, or June actually. Anyway, this is Scott Orlin. Until next time.
I've never been a man who lived an office life. I've never been a man behind a desk. I'm not made for things like mowing lawns or apron strings. I'm my best when not at rest. So I fight the dragons and I storm the castles and I win a battle or two. But then a feeling comes like 50,000 drums all banging, bringing my stories home to you.